When Masters of the Universe was launched in 1982, it started off with 8 figures. Most of the characters shared the same body, and basically new heads, new armor was what distinguished one from another. But the brand took off. In fact, it really took off, and it quickly became the best-selling boys' toy line, and in fact one of the best-selling toy lines in Mattel, overtaking Hot Wheels and Barbie. Put a pin in that, because we're going to come back to that fact in a bit. And as He-Man and Skeletor's armies grew, it became necessary in time to add more factions so that there could be more conflict. And more conflict means more toys, and more toys means more ivory back scratchers for everyone. So with the Horde introduced in 1985 and then followed up by the Snake Men in 1986, the brand was set to become a huge cast of characters, and when we did MOTU Classics from 2008 to 2015, we were able to recreate pretty much all of those vintage toys. And there were collectors out there that drifted to one faction over another. Some people preferred the Princess of Power characters. Some people preferred one of the evil factions like the aforementioned Horde or the Snake Men. And that's what sort of brings us together today. While a lot of fans and a lot of the public at large think of He-Man's enemies as Skeletor and his evil warriors, with the characters that started off the line in 1982 and got expanded in 1983 with characters like Evil Lyn and Trapjaw, well, they're not the most beloved villains in the Masters of the Universe world. And I really can't give that credit to the Snake Men either. While the Snake Men are awesome, the fact that they didn't show up until very late in the line and never appeared in the He-Man Filmation series has sort of hurt their appeal over the years. The one in the middle, Hordak and the Evil Horde, tends to be the most popular faction of villains, if you will, especially when we poll the fans. Maybe it's because they're super evil, maybe it's because they were the villains in the more popular She-Ra Princess of Power animated series, and I say that based on ratings, not just personal feelings, which happen to be true. I like the She-Ra show better than the He-Man show, but that's a YouTube video for another time. And no, not every Horde member got an action figure back in the vintage line. They represented a major direction that would change the momentum of the show and the series and the toy line, essentially adding a new set of bad guys. When the Snake Men were introduced in 86-87 as a third faction, yet another group of bad guys that could have a conflict with both He-Man, Skeletor, and Hordak, they were popular. I'm not saying they weren't, and I'm not downplaying how cool the Snake Men are, but because of the difference in years between the launch of the brand in 82 and when the Snake Men appeared, well, you sort of had to be a newcomer or younger to know the Snake Men. But there was a crossover. There were Snake Men who weren't just Snake Men and were basically crossed over into another faction. Specifically, I'm talking about Tongue Lashor and Rattlor, two of the original Snake Men from the first lineup. Now, both of them had the Snake Men insignia on package, which showed that their allegiance was to King Hiss and his, slithering foes. But when they did show up in animation, and they're the only two Snake Men that did, well, they weren't Snake Men. I mean, they were Snake Men, but they weren't members of King Hiss's entourage. They were part of the Horde. And this is due to 2 reasons. The first is real-world logistics of toy production, animation production, and just the way character rollouts work. And the second one is more of an incontinuity issue and actually reflects on both the Classics toy line and the 2000X series, or the 2001-2002 series. So while He-Man was very popular, by 1985-1986 he was off the air and had been replaced with a new show set in the same universe, more or less, different planet, but crossovers did happen, and that was the She-Ra show. Now, obviously, they met, being brother and sister, not boyfriend and girlfriend, like some people still think. And She-Ra did go through a lot of changes between her toy and her animation. One of those being the way she was designed. In the original version, she had a secret identity, and her mask went over her face to hide it, which I suppose was a more useful disguise than Clark Kent's glasses, because, nobody knew Clark Kent was Superman. Alright, anyway, That is why a lot of the modern She-Ra toys, including Origins and Classics and the large doll they did for Comic-Con, they being Mattel, feature a She-Ra that has a reversible mask, where you can either attach it as the designers originally intended, or reverse it, which is how the girls in the testing groups put it, because they wanted to see She-Ra's pretty face. They didn't want it hidden. And that's why She-Ra wound up in the Filmation series with the wings on the side of her head, because girls swapped the mask. The original idea behind She-Ra was that she was going to be created in the same vein as Teela and Evil Lyn, so that all the characters would sort of live together as action figures. But when He-Man toys started outselling Barbie in the mid-'80s, well, the girls group wanted a piece of that sweet, sweet He-Man sales money, and they sort of took over the brand and reimagined She-Ra not as an action figure brand, but as a doll, giving her rooted hair, changeable cloth outfits, combs for their hair, and other things that played up the way girls naturally play with dolls. Not that boys can't play with dolls, but for the most part, the audience for dolls tends to be girls, and the audience for action figures tends to be boys. What can I say? Sales reports. Alright, so this is a video about the Snake Man. Why are we talking about She-Ra? Well, it's because, as I noted, like some of the later characters in the Masters of the Universe line, they wound up in the She-Ra animated series, not the He-Man line. And this actually included Hordak. Hordak was not designed to be She-Ra's archenemy. Hordak was originally designed to be another enemy of He-Man. Well, actually, to be fair, he was designed to be an enemy of Skeletor and He-Man, first introduced in the Power of the Evil Horde book that was packed in with the Hordak Grizzlor 2-pack. Although written before any of the Horde figures shipped, fans didn't actually get to read it till later on when this pack shipped. But the book did come first from a continuity and development standpoint. And when She-Ra series was being developed and was in need of enemies, well, since the Horde were being developed for new enemies of He-Man and the Snake Man hadn't yet seen the light of day, well, He-Man was fading and his show was off the air. So She-Ra won out and got to have the Horde and two of the Snake Men as her enemies on the show, simply because there was no more He-Man show for them to be in. And since they were developed to be bad guys for He-Man, and She-Ra shared that world back before the brands were separated legally by Classic Media, but again, a YouTube video for another time. So the versions in Filmation obviously look different from the toys, with Tongue Lashor being more of a salamander and Rattlor being more like, well, a rattlesnake. Now, they didn't really get screen time, at least the Snake Man proper, until 2000X, when in the second series, and 2000X being the Mike Young series, that's what the fans call it, because, everything was extreme, hence 2000X, and it came out in 2001. So the Classics line really worked on picking up the story of the 2000X cartoon, because it sort of ended before its time, with the first mini-comic even noting that it had been many, months since the final episode. Now, the two characters here, Rattlor and Tongue Lashor, in the Classics line, were released with Horde armbands. And this was done for two reasons. One, to pay homage to them appearing as members of the Horde in the She-Ra series, and because of what was happening in the 2000X series. Now, we never got to this, and the story beats never fully played out, simply because the show went off the air before it could. But what was going to happen, based on the notes that Dean and Ian gave me when they left Mattel, or when Ian did, and Dean unfortunately is no longer with us, but the notes that they provided spelled out how the story beats between Cobra Khan and Rattlor were going to continue to play out. So if you recall, in the 2002 show, Cobra Khan was a descendant of the Snake Men, and when the Snake Men returned, he essentially dropped his allegiance to Skeletor and became a de facto member of the Snake Men, but was treated as basically a red-headed stepchild by the true Snake Men, who saw him as just a descendant, a far-off cousin of the Snake Man, not a true Snake Man. He wasn't there for the battles with King Grayskull back in the day. And he and Rattlor definitely went head-to-head several times, and there was a big conflict between them on the show, but it never really reached its apex, simply because the show was canceled before this could happen. The idea, if the show had continued, was that Cobra Khan and Rattlor were going to continue to sort of scheme against each other, each one trying to sort of get the spotlight of King Hiss and become his number one advisor and, whispering in his ear. Well, Cobra Khan sort of won this out, and convinced King Hiss that both Tongue Lashor and Rattlor were betraying him. And Hiss essentially kicked them out of the Snake Man on the advice of Cobra Khan. Unfortunately, we never got to see the storyline play out, and only the first few beats of it made it into the show. Had it continued, we would have seen this, and we would have seen those two Snake Men changing factions and becoming members of the Horde. The most we got for 2000X continuing was this pack-in mini-comic with the DVD set that told the final episode, episode 39's script, and the fact that the Horde appeared in episode 35 and were set up to be the major villains of the third season, the Snake Men being the villains of the second season. So while the Horde made one major appearance in episode 35 and Hordak appeared in shadow in an episode a few before that, we never really got to see them incorporated into the show as they were intended. And when we updated all of the figures for Classics, well, Rattlor, who no longer had to be called the General, because, copyright rules and all that, Rattlor came back and was now available again. So he was also going to be packed in with a Horde armband, or rather a Horde armband was also packed in with him. This was to both pay homage to the original storyline, where Snake Men joined the Horde in the Princess of Power show, and to play up what was going to happen in 2000X, with Classics being the natural continuation of that storyline. And other characters like the Snake Horde Trooper that were released at PowerCon also doubled down on this concept, even if it was inadvertently. So, while the Snake Men appeared in the Princess of Power show back in the day simply because they were available, for Classics, they joined the Horde for an actual story reason, and that was a continuation of what was happening in 2000X and a way to finish that story that so many fans had fallen in love with. And if you want to slip that armband on Rattlor and Tongue Lashor, hey, you can do that. Or, maybe they just learned about the Horde in school. One of the two. I hope you enjoyed this video on a subject that actually has been requested quite a lot in the comment section. Do share this video, because sharing is caring, and it's the best way to help get fun toy information to other YouTube fans, and for YouTube to know it's, popular enough to share. What can I say? It's how the algorithm works. Not quite the way milkshakes work. Leave a comment, subscribe. Thanks for watching.